financing options, and when people talk about financing options, they're often thinking about the relative merits of internal financing versus external finance. But I think within both categories there's a lot of evolution and innovation, both of which can make a real difference to a programme. So in internal financing, you've got most companies still using their normal divisional budgets, but we're starting to see the appearance of dedicated internal funds. Certainly from the survey, that's an area that is expected to grow. You're seeing some quite pioneering strategies around co-investing with pension funds. And so I think on internal finance, which is still the broad part of financing, there's innovation. Similarly, on external financing, you've got your normal asset financing, typically of single assets, but then we're starting to see an array of energy performance contracts coming in. So within strategies, you're starting to see different types of finance being used. So in the case study on Barts Hospital, in the white paper, they started off funding everything which paid back within 2 years internally, and then for the longer paybacks, they're using energy performance contracts which meet the payback requirements for some of the EPC providers. So you can use the different forms of finance within the same strategy. So today we've got 4 panelists, 2 of whom are well known to you. So I'm just going to ask Stephen Fawkes and John Miles to introduce themselves to everybody.
Morning, I'm Steve Fawkes. I'm a partner at Matrix, and I run the new energy and clean tech practice. Prior to joining the world of corporate finance, I spent nearly 30 years implementing energy efficiency programs, and I've also co-founded 2 ESCOs along the way.
And you're the only person I know who's written a book on energy efficiency as well.
That's right.
And John?
John Miles, RBS Sustainable Energy Finance. There are banks in this space, and hopefully today we can share some views here. But just as a way of a background, we were signed up to Clinton Climate Initiative since 2007, pledged $1 billion of funding there. We've been tied up with, Corviz said this morning about the LEAF fund. We're sitting behind that. There's a whole host of funding behind that. So RBS has just worked out over the last 18 months a new product, funnily enough, called energy performance contracting. It's not what the ESCOs do, it's what the financing is all about. So we've worked out a way of either you guys using your own funds, you go and borrow the funds, you do whatever you do on your normal day-to-day basis. The third option is either getting it off as a revenue item or a P&L item. And that's what we've done. So if you want to call it off balance sheet, you can, but we'll elaborate on that in a second.
Great. Well, I'm sure we'll come back to EPCs quite a few times. I just want to bring Robin back in, because Robin spoke earlier. And I know that Siemens have been using an internal fund on top of your normal activities.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could just talk to us about why you've created a separate internal fund for energy efficiency.
Which is the best mic? Thank you. Thanks, Patrick. Well, I think really it comes back to some of what Patrick was saying earlier in terms of, at the end of the day, it's pure business sense. I mean, with the devil at the door in terms of energy prices that we're all facing, and as I said before, we in the UK are a significant manufacturer as well as just being a sales and marketing organisation. It's a big issue. So the company has recognised this and said we need to do something about it and put some money aside specifically for energy efficient projects. And this runs right the way through the fabric of the organisation. Primarily focused on buildings, interested in the 1% because that's our area for focus, but it goes right the way across also manufacturing opportunities as well for energy efficiency. So we're looking fundamentally as it's almost like a corporate wake-up call to the fact that we need to do something about it. As I said earlier, been struggling with the fact that really it is a no-brainer. The pressures are there, they're real business pressures. We should be doing something about it, and the board has actually sat up and said, right, we're sticking £100 million aside. It's nothing in the context of your kind of investment, but they said, £100 million aside to invest in making the fabric of our business a lot more energy efficient, and thereby also driving some of the behaviours also, which will have knock-on effect and knock-on benefit in years to come.
What are the payback thresholds on that?
Quite tight. Nothing again in comparison with Patrick's business, but we're talking about in the region of 3 to 4 years, so they're quite tight. And the Congleton example that I talked to earlier was exactly one of those projects. We're looking for payback in 3 to 4 years, and quite interestingly, it might be interesting to you. The reason why it's 3 to 4 years is because we're working in this context with our landlord. So our landlord is actually Siemens Real Estate. So they're the guys who've actually got the money in this case to actually invest, and we're the tenant. So that's why they're looking for the 3 to 4 year payback as opposed to something like a 10 to 20 year payback.
And what are the advantages of a dedicated fund rather than going through sort of normal capex procedures?
It doesn't cast those to one side. It's just an impetus. It provides an impetus to the organisation to say, right, this is a message from the top to say we are actually interested in energy efficiency, and by the way, we sell also in energy efficient technology. So it's like closing the circle really, and practicing what we preach as an organisation to say we will be responsible. There's also an absolutely compelling business case for it. Get on and do it.
And I just want to have a look at get the sort of panel's view on the some of the survey figures that came out. And probably the most striking figure for me in the survey was that we asked companies how much of their investment opportunity they estimated they'd realised so far. And 51% of the respondents estimated that their organisation has realised less than 33% of their commercially viable energy efficiency investments available to them. I'm just sort of wondering if that comes as a surprise to this panel, and if they think that financing is something that would change that. Maybe John, we'd start with you.
I don't find that a surprise at all. If you've got two elements to this, public sector and private sector, both of them share a common view. This is too good to be true. The private sector have the additional handicap of procurement. So there's an awful lot of navel gazing. There's not a lot of doing. There are some projects around that are happening. The London refit programme is bringing some of those to the market, but you still have a procurement issue where funding is not available within that procurement vehicle. So it is too good to be true, except it isn't. If you've got your own money, go do them. Go and do your energy performance contracting. But please don't fall into the problems that everyone that I've come across falls into. Short-termism. If you do the quick fixes, you can't do the building fabrics, or it makes it very, very difficult. And other things, if you go and stick in voltage optimization, fantastic product. But if you put it in before you do the lighting, your lighting doesn't work. It's silly things like that. So you need a chief exec to understand what the strategy is. All you guys out there, all the ESCOs, are brilliant at this. You've got sustainability advisors who are brilliant at this. But you used to build strategies knowing that funding was available, certainly in the public sector. Now, where's all the funding gone? So let's build it with the finance in mind. And that's where it's all falling down, because there are projects out there that can be done tomorrow. Then everyone goes to procurement and goes, oops, forgot about that, can't do it. You can. There's other ways. And if I was to say to you, when you employ people within your building, if it's a promotion from within, you very rarely look at the CV. When you're employing someone from without, you study their CV to the nth degree. Look at what you can already do. Public sector, you already have procurement vehicles you can use for energy services. Private sector, you can already do this. So just understand what you're actually sitting on. It isn't too good to be true. It's just too simple to understand. We're always looking for the problem. It's not there. Go do it. And I've got a big checkbook, believe you me.
Steve.
Okay, well, it certainly doesn't surprise me, because I think for the last 30 years, whenever people have studied the excuse me, the potential for cost-effective energy efficiency, the number usually comes out at 20 to 30% of total energy use. And we've not seen anything like that being achieved. And I think it comes back to very few organizations, even now, have a properly organized, strategic, systematic energy management program. And if you look at 3M, and I was glad to hear the 3M example, it's pity Pip couldn't be here, but for the last 30 years, that has been a beacon of how to do good energy management. And very few organizations have actually followed that model properly. I think one of the other issues is, obviously, this is related to energy price and concerns about carbon. And back in the early to mid, maybe even to the late 80s and into the very early 90s, we were very active in energy management, and techniques like monitoring and targeting and surveys and the various technologies were well understood, and there was a better diffusion of energy management practice. Then post-privatization of the energy industry here, everybody started focusing on price rather than volume, and a lot of that expertise disappeared. And there are very few people around who still have that experience and memory of how to do this stuff back then, which can be reused. And I think a lot of organizations are having to relearn stuff that was forgotten or has been forgotten or lost. So it doesn't really surprise me at all that achievement of potential is relatively small.
But for you, it's not so much a financing issue, it's more of a strategic issue.
Well, I think it's a strategic issue, and then financing comes into the implementation of that. But financing choice, or the choice of financing method, is subject to a higher level strategic choice and commitment to energy efficiency. And people like 3M made that choice, made that strategic decision, and then put in the right systems to implement it on an ongoing basis. A lot of other organizations put in sort of, let's say, hybrid models that didn't work, or they gave up when energy prices went down, and so the effort was diffused and dissipated. But the financing comes as a second level decision, really.
Could I also add that every single client that I've been to see assumes there is a capital expense involved. And that's not the case. This is already in your budget. You are already wasting so much revenue on your energy bill. So capture that waste and use that to pay for the retrofit. And that's the way to do it. I hear talks of payback. Why? You're not investing. You're literally solving for the energy savings. That's all you're doing. And you're using a revenue item that is already there to capture it. There is no capital expenditure. Why do you need to go to procurement? And that is a real misconception.
Yeah, and if I add to that, so just add to that, I think that's part of what I was saying about the approach to energy management that's been lost, if you like. There is so much that can be done by better management of existing assets, motivation, all of those issues. I mean, in the mid-80s, we did programs in social services premises, and social services premises are incredibly difficult because they're children's homes, old people's homes, and the people running them are focused on their core activity, as they should be. But putting the right systems in place, resulted in savings of definitely around 10% overall. So, huge revenue savings on day one with no capex involved at all. And then it's important also to do that first, because otherwise you can misdirect capex, because you're trying to solve a problem that doesn't have to be there.
I was going to say, just picking on your point earlier about procurement. I mean, ideally in my line, and where I'm selling the technology, I'd like to avoid procurement like the plague really, but any procurement people out there, I don't want to insult you. But I think there's an education process that needs to be done also within procurement. I mean, our Anglo-Saxon methodology of procuring kit is blocking our progress. Because for example, if I look at an industrial motor, a 75 kilowatt industrial motor, actually to procure that, even on the capital terms, that costs £5,000 roughly. it's going to cost £1 million to run that motor for 20 years in terms of its energy consumption. So to sell a better efficient motor is an absolute no-brainer, but you're ultimately dealing in many cases with the procurement guy or lady who's tasked with getting the unit cost of that purchase down. And the twain shall never meet unless procurement actually become more involved, more educated in terms of life cycle costs of the equipment that they're being tasked with procuring.
Yeah, that's certainly something we kind of, the whole point of Network Rail is what we call whole life, whole system costing, where we're educating our procurement people to behave differently, but it's not just the procurement people, it's the engineers. How do you design a system so that it is more energy efficient and therefore procure it with potentially a higher upfront capital cost, but significant ongoing savings? And that you can finance that, and I know there's no capex ever because the bank will give it to you, but you economically you've still got some upfront cost often in order to realize the gain. You can either finance that externally with a bank, or you can finance it internally depending on your own resources. But getting the people in the business who understand the performance of the equipment that you're buying and who can make the projections to advise, input into the procurement process, because everybody's got one, whether you're private or public sector. You've got some analysis being done before you make a decision, but input the whole life, and if you push that, it makes it a lot easier. It's easy for us to justify investments that save money over a long time, because that's the way our regulatory regime works. We are supposed to do that. So it's easy for us. I appreciate it's hard for other people, but banging on about the whole life, whole cost is the way to break through that prejudice for, I can save $5 on the engine, it'll cost me more to run, but I don't care about that because that's somebody else's budget. I just buy engines. I don't buy the fuel.
Budget. This comes down to, let's be clear as to what you're buying. And this is absolutely where it gets lost. And I'll simplify this, and I don't mean to be rude. Who remembers Only Fools and Horses? Yeah, the comedy show? And Trigger was asked, how many brooms have you had, Trigger, sweeping the road? And he said, only one, Dave. I've had 57 heads and 37 handlers. Systematic upgrade. What are you buying? You are buying Trigger's service. You are not buying his broom. It's that simple. So simple, stunned you.
Yeah.
Right? You're not buying brooms.
No, but somebody's buying brooms.
You're not
Economically,
buying-
the broom is being
Okay.
purchased, and there's a cost of capital in financing the broom, and you should make the right choice about where you want to put the risks and who you want to raise the finance.
That's a different issue.
Correct, but the broom is being bought,
Okay, another.
as is Trigger.
Okay, well, another example.
Sorry, I'm agreeing with you because the point is Trigger costs a lot more than the broom.
Correct.
Because Trigger needs to eat and live and drink beer with Rodney and all the rest of it. And so you often mistake what the visible cost of the broom
Absolutely.
for the invisible cost of the trigger.
What I'm saying is that
I've
cost is
lost my
already
analogy there.
that's already embedded within your business. So let's take that waste out. To put another example, you've got some very clever guys here who sit within ESCOs. The ESCOs are sitting behind a guarantee of performance. So we're onto risk transfer here. So who's taking that? Well, I can go on to this in great depth, but just to bring it back to the analogy, you are buying a meter reading on your wall that is currently burning at 100 and is going to go to 80 and stay there because my friends in the ESCO guarantee that that is what's going to happen. So you're funding the energy reduction as shown to you by a meter. How they get there, you don't care. Obviously you do because it's going to impact on bits in your building. But basically, you are buying that service. And you've got to unstifle, if that is the right word, the innovation. You've got to let the ESCOs do what they're good at. And I can fund it. So you're capturing your waste to pay, quite rightly, as you say, but let the ESCOs do what they can do. Change the meter reading from 80 or 100 to 80 and stay there for 10 years. That's what you're buying. Be clear.
Have we got any questions from the floor? So we've got about 15 minutes left on this panel. This gentleman here, yes.
Sorry, James. You've got a glass.
Thank you. Michael Rudd from Bird and Bird. Patrick, given the nature of your business, it's not only rail regulation that's relevant to you, it's the broader utility regulation, which is an indirect impact. There's always been a concern regarding the green agenda about lack of coordination amongst the regulators, and when you think you've got an opportunity here, suddenly you find you can't do it because another piece of regulation doesn't encourage it. I'm just interested in your experience in terms of your investment decisions of trying to deal with that complex situation.
The short answer is that it hasn't been a huge problem for us thus far, because the assumption we've always made is that when we put a train on the track and we switch the power on, then there'll be power emerging from the grid to move the train. As we start to roll out a bigger electrification program and we start to see coal-fired power stations shutting down and no evidence whatsoever of anybody building any new ones, I think we're going to get some bumping up of regulatory agendas. Well, one of the other challenges we have is as we work with the DNOs and National Grid to get supply points put in place, you get at the operational level quite often big conflicts, and they manifest sometimes in stupid ways. We were doing Farringdon Station just around the corner, and we put a new substation in the middle of what was actually the underground station, but could have been our station, and EDF wouldn't take it into their ownership because we couldn't guarantee them unfettered access to their substation. They couldn't take the substation unless they had unfettered access. The underground can't give anybody unfettered access over its railway for obvious reasons, and so you had a regulatory impasse. And I still don't know how they resolved it, and I'm not sure I want to know, but it's now in and working and everybody's happy. But you get that conflict bumping up between the two. But by and large, I actually think we work reasonably well with the DNOs and with National Grid and reasonably collaboratively. I think if we can get our own grid better organised, I think there's a lot more we can do to play our part in helping to balance some of the national power stuff. But so far it hasn't been a problem. I think as we do more electrification, it could well be more of a challenge.
Hi, Darren from Siemens. Where do you see the incentivisation from governments when we look at things like feed-in tariffs, which are long-term incentivisation into what are fast improving technologies? How do you see that impacting on investment choice and financing in the future?
Is that a question for Steve, maybe?
Well, I think what we've seen with feed-in tariffs is obviously a lot of investment that the feed-in tariffs have created. I would question from a UK PLC point of view whether those feed-in tariffs are the right way to go. They're certainly a lot less cost-effective than investing in energy efficiency. And there would be an argument, and it's an argument that has been made, that if you have a feed-in tariff for some renewable energy, you should have an energy efficiency feed-in tariff. Now that raises all kinds of issues about measurement and verification and all the rest of it, but it's a perfectly sensible idea as far as I can see, one that's being pushed in government at the moment. I think the other aspect that you're touching on is the whole way that the electricity market works. And obviously, at the moment, EMR, electricity market reform, is ongoing. A lot of arguments have been made. I co-chaired a group called the D3 Group, which was demand management, demand response, and distributed generation. And we argued that the evidence from around the world shows that when you create a market that allows energy efficiency and other demand services to come into the electricity market, you actually find there is this very cost-effective, reliable resource that can be used by the electricity market. But if you don't set up the market in the right way, you will shut that resource off. So I think it's very important that EMR includes those kind of mechanisms. I think so far, there's some encouraging smoke signals, but I'm descended from Guy Fawkes, so my scepticism around politicians is reasonably high. I'll wait and see what comes out in July when the white paper comes out.
Right next door to...
I think it's just one observation I'd make, I'd be interested to get comments, would be on making sure that where there are programs of investment, that the end user does still A, understand, and B, have confidence in the improvements that are being made to their buildings, to their factories, to their retail outlets, etc. There's an awful lot of guarantees bandied around in the industry, but actually, if the savings aren't being made, first of all, the carbon reductions aren't being achieved, and secondly, there isn't money being saved, and therefore that's going to come out in the wash somewhere along the line. And guarantees may look robust on day one, but it's important that people are confident about the proposals that are being put forward to them as consumers, and secondly, that they ensure that there is some robustness behind the projects that are being proposed and implemented.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the critical issue of measurement and verification of savings, and any EPC or shared savings type contract, that whole issue of M&V needs to be addressed right at the beginning, and protocols need to be agreed, methods for calculating the savings need to be agreed. And I think there's been enough work now on things like the international protocol and M&V that there is a basis to work on, and an external body of knowledge that both parties in an EPC contract can use to establish a methodology. But it's incredibly difficult. When I was at RWE, we were working with Sainsbury's on energy savings, and you have to go into an incredibly high level of detail of measurement and verification to prove that a saving on a project was being made. And part of that also hooks back to the quality of information coming from the energy supplier, because generally the quality of information from the energy supplier is very, very poor. And you get situations like that the store is shut down because you're putting in voltage regulation, but the energy supplier's system decides that it's just a gap in the data and decides to fill in the data. So according to the electricity data, you've used energy in a period when the store shut down, all those kind of issues. But M&V, measurement and verification of savings, is critical.
And that's absolutely vital to any funder, because the measurement and verification protocols are robust, but you can't have ESCOs marking their own homework. So you need an independent verification, which can be input at the same time. And that's when you need, just as the ESCO's guarantee of performance unlocks the funding, the measurement and verification unlocks my belief in whether they've done their job. Yeah? So absolutely key. And we're working with a different way of doing this, so that an independent consultant does, if you like, the investment grade audit. It's not quite, but the independent consultant will do the strategy for the chief exec and say, this is what needs to be done to get to where you want to get to. This is your baseline, that's where you're starting from, so let's be clear. Now, Mr. ESCO, go and do your work. But that consultant is with us all the way down the line, so we know that it's delivering what it says on the tin.
Let's go up the back over there.
Thank you. I'd like to say there's a bit of a bias to that side of the room, so I thought I'd try and even things up. I'm a director of an energy and sustainability group, and we're one of the consortia in REFIT. I also head up Cornet Sustainability Committee, and there's a clash of kind of two worlds, where you've got the occupiers world and the EPC world. And I'm interested in John's point about just get on and do it. And I think I've worked with John a bit on better building partnership stuff in the past. And I think, John, it's a great kind of sentiment. But the real estate structure in the UK especially, probably more so than any other country in the world, is so complex with stakeholders with vested interest. Yep. And I'm kind of interested to know from the panel as a whole how we think the EPC format can kind of transcend that complexity and actually deliver something real.
Okay. Just to give a bit of background there, Better Buildings Partnership, the 14 biggest property owners in the city, and the LDA, bless them, put us all together to try and figure out the green lease. So under CRC, piece of legislation that says you must make your buildings green. It's great if you're an owner-occupier, because it kind of makes sense, but if you're leasing it out, the lessee is getting the benefit of the energy reduction, so why would you as an owner do it? So we've been struggling and getting to terms with the green lease. Really interestingly, at the Better Buildings Partnership presentation, and I don't know if Brookfield are here today, I saw the name outside, but Brookfield have just done a case study with one of the buildings in Canary Wharf, which was a subleased building. And actually, it was the tenants that went to the landlord and said, we'll share in the cost of this. We want cheaper energy, so can we get together and retrofit the building? So actually, it's being turned on its head. The market is developing and is actually bringing the solution for us.
Does anyone else want to comment on that?
Ooh, he does.
I think, yeah, I don't know. I know the guys at Brookfield Green, what they've been up to, and I just think that the amount of pain they've gone through to get where they have is not a great advert for kind of rolling it out on a mass, which is what we're talking about here, rolling out on a mass kind of production. They've got to start somewhere, but it's just there were so many impediments they had to kind of overcome.
But pioneers get circled by wagons, right?
Yeah.
Someone's got to change it, and someone had to be first. And we're struggling with this, procurement. That just needs to rethink its process. So the first one to market is always going to have a nightmare. And believe you me, they've had a nightmare. But they've got there, and that's the thing that we should be taking from this.
Just to touch on one of the case studies and white papers on Sony. And Sony's got lots of manufacturing facilities across Europe, and they felt they had a great variation in energy management between sites. So they hired in JLL to manage all their sites, and one of the main things that JLL had to do was renegotiate all of their leases with their landlords. So presumably JLL have developed a sort of a formula for doing this. So yes, the first ones probably are going to be very painful, but then once a pattern of renegotiating leases is developed, then it can probably get easier and easier.
And what's driving this? Is it their bottom line, or is it their green brand that they're trying to?
Well, I think with Sony, it's two things. They got first of all, they got their targets set by head office, and every site has to measure its performance against those targets, and if it's not compliant, it has to look at all the investments they have looked at. So it's driven, I think, primarily by targets, but then within the profit centres, it's they're investing up to an acceptable return locally. So I think it's twin drivers.
There's also another driver now, and information is now coming out that the future sale value of buildings is going up if they're green, and the future lease value is going up if they're green. So, yes, there is. I can't quote you, but I can put you in contact with...
There's a lot of debate about that.
There's a lot of... Yeah,
it's a bit early, but there is anecdotal evidence.
I think there's some signs, but if you talk to some of the hard-nosed property people, they would say absolutely no way.
Yeah. I think that some will argue you can get higher occupancy rates, but no higher rents. Yeah.
I just ask one.
Yes, do.
Just a little add-on to the last point was, do you think the Green Deals will help with this landlord-tenant friction?
Did everyone hear that question? The question was, will the... You ask it again.
Do you think that the government's Green Deals will help with the landlord-tenant friction?
Who are you directing that one at? It has raised the profile for people to understand that there is something coming. So a Green Deal for the residential market, you asked the question why Cedrica have gone early with Go Early. Because they couldn't wait and didn't want to wait, and they saw some hiccups in the way. So what it has done is raise the profile in the market that there is an ability to pay for something by capturing future energy savings, which actually is the essence of energy performance contracting, but it's debt. All right? Now, where does that debt sit? It either sits with the house on the meter, or it sits with the person who paid for the kit to go in, whatever. So you've still got, if you magnify that from residential to corporate, you've still got the capex restraints, unless someone can unlock off-balance sheet without having to go to special purpose vehicles and all the expense that goes there.
So you don't think it'll work?
It will work, yes.
Be made to work.
Okay, we've got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to take a question from over there up at the back. And then
Hi there, Tom Berry from Kimberly-Clark. I'm just wondering if there are talk on the panel of rules of thumb of savings available. Are there rules of thumb in terms of the cost of using third parties to get those savings? So there's third-party financing, third-party management. Are there rules of thumb in terms of what cut of those savings those parties will expect?
Perhaps I can give you a very perverse example here. I presented in Ireland, and this gentleman at the back would not leave it alone. What are you charging me? What interest rate are you charging me? And perversely, the ESCO model, which says, I will guarantee a reduction in your energy consumption over a period of time. And what I do as a financier and you as a client and with the ESCO, we work out what that balancing point is. If I charged 30% as interest rate, what would that do to the project? It would put it out as a payback, for want of a better term. The payback would go out to 35 years. But if the ESCO is willing to guarantee those energy savings, bingo, you don't care what the interest rate is because you are wasting the money anyway. You're going back to my internal rate of return. Does it meet my 4.75%? Let's do it. But there are other issues here. What's the cost of your wasted energy within your balance sheet? That's the real thing we're looking at here.
I was going to add
3%. Depends on what period your payback is. The cost of capital, because we like to use that word because we're bankers, is more for a 10-year project than it is for 3-year, which is why everyone goes for 3-year, because they think they're getting the best deal. Wrong. You're not getting the difficult projects done. You're looking at a cost of funds which is not out of the market in any way, shape or form. Let's call it a 3% margin, if that's what you want to call it. But it's agreed up front with you and the ESCO. This is the cost of financing for this project. Are you, ESCO, able to deliver with the kit that you want to put in those savings, and are you going to guarantee it? Are you, Mr. Client, happy to pay a hell or high water service payment for the next 10 years to make it all work? Yes or no? And if it's no, write your own cheque. And if it's that simple, why aren't you writing your own cheques? Sorry to be really blunt.
Yeah, I think John has a very pure model of ESCOs, which is the right approach, and probably that difference in let's say culture probably is one of the factors that explains why the ESCO market in the US, for example, is much more developed than the UK. Often, I've said this often, that part of the culture, part of that reason is a cultural thing. And I think fundamentally he's right. But the reality is the ESCOs selling projects will come across the finance director and others who will always ask what the interest rate is. And you know, the reality is it does vary with projects. You have to be careful about the way it's presented and the optics of the deal. You know, there are lots of ways of hiding the financing cost in EPC deals, if you know how to do it.
I think, for me, we've all been sold investment policies before, and they say, trust me, the fees are competitive. And so it's been regulated, and they have to tell us what the fees are. So I like to know, but that's not the most important point. The key point is, does it enable you to unlock those savings at all or quicker than you would be able to do yourself with your own money and your own processes and your own time? That's the question, and therefore it becomes a matter of a commercial negotiation as you sell this cash flow to the bank and the ESCO. Are they able to pay more for that cash flow than you will pay yourself, because you'll never get the cash flow, because you'll never get the capex, or you don't know how to do it, or you don't have the kit, or whatever it is. So for me, the judgment is one about speed of access to the savings, because every day that goes by you're wasting money, and therefore the sooner you can access those savings, the greater the time value of money. And then there's simply a competitive dynamic which says what's the best deal to get me the greatest amount of savings most quickly, and that's where your procurement department is your friend. And you can compete the ESCOs and the banks and get the deal that's right for you. But it's not where I would completely agree is that actually what the cost is the cost. Because there's a market. If the market's rigged or unfair, then fine, don't play. But if you're comfortable with the deal and it gets you the savings quicker, then exactly how it works, you should understand. But that's not the big point. The big point is, does it pay back in whatever your own parameters are? And being clear about your own parameters is what enables you to make decisions. And if you look at, and I've worked in public and private sector, often the problem with the public sector is people don't have a view. They just want to go through a process, and that's because they get rewarded for going through a process, not for delivering an outcome, and that's not their fault. That's the way the system works, because nobody gets fired for running a good process. You just get fired for making a bad decision. So if you never make a decision, then you're in good shape. So, and I've done that. I'm not critical of people, but that's what the system rewards, and that's what politicians work for. But to make this stuff work, you have to have your own view. You have to say, this is how much we're spending, and you can do all the M and V's and independent whatevers, and this is how much we're spending, this is how much we'll save, this person's underwritten it, they're going to be here for at least 10 minutes, and that's long enough for me. Here's the bank, they put the money in, deal makes sense, lock it up, and make the decision and move on.
Yeah, and I think that certainty of delivering savings is the major argument for using an ESCO or an EPC, whatever form it's in. And that comes back to my earlier point that a lot of the organisations out there have actually lost energy management ability. There isn't the technical skill there that it used to be. I mean, in the 80s, big retailers would have 20 people looking at energy. Now I think the entire technical department at most of the retailers is a few people, and things are outsourced. So there is a real shortage of in-house technical ability. Yep. And if you do have a reliable ESCO or EPC contractor who can deliver on day one savings and are guaranteeing those savings, then that has to be attractive.
If I can give you a real live example,
Can I say we better be quick, because
it'll be incredibly quick. One of my colleagues in the front row went to an engineering company. The engineering company says, I don't need financing. I can raise funds cheaper than any bank can. I don't need it. Correct. Go do it then. But I don't want to raise the funds to make my buildings green. I want to raise the funds to make my widgets and engines. So it's an absolute choice here of the most efficient use of your capital. And if you don't want to raise or use your own capital, use someone else's or your waste. It's just a business decision that you make every day.
Okay, we've got
one more question.
You've waited very patiently.
Hi, I'm Andrew Boyd, Unilever Sustainability Manager globally in supply chain. Questions for Robin from Siemens. You mentioned you have a 100 million capex fund centrally, internally I presume.
Yeah.
Two questions around that. One is, how did you decide on the number? Is it some fraction of your energy costs, for example? And secondly, how will you manage it going forward in terms of under allocation or over demand on that budget when you look at the projects coming through? Thanks.
Okay. First of all, the 100 million. I can't say I was involved in that process, so I can't say what it's based on.
It came from Berlin.
It came from from Munich stroke Berlin. Barbara Cooks came up with a number, the lady I referred to earlier, who's our sustainability champion. So basically the board decided to put this money aside and make it available. Now, in terms of the process, how it works, it's a free-for-all really, so we have to bid for projects. So we present projects through our real estate company, and it goes into a process which is reviewed on each case on its merits. So and it's being eaten up fast, the fund that's available. We've had a significant amount already in the UK, but as I say, it's on a case-by-case basis, but it's a free-for-all.
So I was wondering, if it's oversubscribed, what will you do next year? Or if it's not used up this year, what will you do next year?
Well, in terms of the targets that have been set by the board, I'm sure if it's proven to be successful, which the early signs are, looking at the success we've seen locally, then I'm sure it's something that's not going to go away. But I can't speak on behalf of my board.
Okay, well, I think we should wrap up there. It's interesting to look in the survey results. We asked you how you finance things today versus how you expect to finance things in the future. John will be pleased that third-party financing goes up, internal investment funds go up, internal funding outside of an investment fund goes down, and government funding goes down, and it's probably the biggest dropper out of all of them there. But thank you very much to all of our panellists. It's been an interesting debate. We now have lunch. We'll reconvene at